Welcome to the Dynamic Leadership Overview. This is the third of a four-part series. This one is on development plans. Today, we're pulling many threads together into something practical, immediately actionable, and transformative. You don't need a full HR department or a corporate-sized budget to get started. You just need clarity on what good leadership looks like in your company and the will to create consistency. Today, we're talking about creating structure and accountability for how people grow in your business, from the front line to the executive team. It's also a formula to establish a culture of learning and development, which naturally enables a growth mindset across your team for the long haul. You can start small. Any business can benefit from identifying just one skill that matters, one skill tied to the vision for the strategic leadership team. That alone can change the way that your organization operates. Think about this. When a dental office hires a hygienist, they know exactly what that person can do. There's a shared language, known certifications, and a clear protocol for how things get done, from patient care to insurance processing. But when that same office hires a marketing manager or marketing specialist, there are fewer standards. A degree in marketing or previous experience doesn't guarantee they'll understand the priorities, tone, methods that align with that specific practice and the industry. The gap is even wider for leadership and management. Many leaders are promoted because they've gotten results in the past, not necessarily because they mastered leadership. Over time, they rely on models they picked up from past bosses, school, or pure instinct. The good ones adapt, but left unchecked, this can lead to a mixed metaphor of leadership styles in your company. Family, political, military, populist, and more. And it's just not about inconsistent results. It can lead to friction as people perceive unfair treatment. That left unchecked can lead to what's called a toxic environment. Here's the distinction that matters. Skills in trades and clinical professions often follow structured development protocols. But in business, especially in soft skills and leadership, it's easy to rely too heavily on informal learning and assumptions. In dynamic leadership, we advocate development plans that bring science and structure into that gray area so we can develop consistent performance expectations across the organization. And we're not just closing performance gaps. We're defining standards of excellence that align with your company's strategy and desired culture. That's a powerful shift. There are two types of development plans that you need in your toolkit. Gap-based development plans, this is more traditional, is used to correct or improve specific deficiencies. These are focused, results-oriented, and often time-sensitive. And then there's foundational development plans. These are used to align someone with how you lead and operate in your business, to get that common language I was talking about earlier. These ensure that new leaders, no matter how experienced, are grounded in your organization's leadership style and approach. Whether it's feedback, project cadence, cultural values, whatever it is, you know that there's alignment with your leadership team. Gone are the days where the charismatic leader can simply rely on people figuring out how he or she wants to operate or what he or she expects. Even when talking about experienced people entering your organization, a newly hired operations manager might already know how to run a floor. But if you use a framework like multipliers to guide leadership expectations or apply a 5-step problem-solving model as standard practice, they need to learn your playbook. Otherwise, it's like a new addition to a sports team trying to run the plays from the last team. Once we treat leadership development with the same respect and clarity we give to operational training, we dramatically improve consistency, accountability, and long-term growth. I'll provide universal templates that you can use to get started. We'll also explore how proficiency is assessed using pass-fail scoring, numerical scoring, a tiered expertise level approach. There's different methods to support fair evaluation, targeted coaching, and role readiness. Now, even better, you don't need to wait to implement a plan. You can start small with a single skill like how your leaders assign tasks or facilitate team meetings, Or go even simpler. A simple framework, for example, a basic XY axis, like results versus methods, growth versus profitability, and putting that on a 2-axis grid, it allows you to have a different kind of discussion than just talking about either one of those in a vacuum. So it can be a teaching tool as well as a development benchmark, and this can be done in less than a half hour. You introduce the framework, have a discussion about a real-world problem, something simple, so you can push on it, something that's not urgent or impactful, so you can push on it, make some distinctions, get a common language, and then apply it to something real time. You can do all that in less than a half hour. Do that with each of your leadership team members, and then have them do it with their staff, and in 2 weeks, everybody will be operating on that same thing. Go a little step further. Add in a problem-solving model, a 5-step problem-solving model. There's different variations. There's even a 6-step model, which I like, which includes reflect and adjust as the 6th step, but that's also sometimes included in the 5th step. With implement, test, and adjust. So whether you're a business owner with 5 employees or 50, the most powerful thing you can do is make the invisible visible. Define the skills, name the standards, and give your people a roadmap to grow. And when you do that, you'll find that you foster a growth mindset. One of the challenges with having a growth mindset in an organization is that it's very easy to slip into pass-fail. This happens for a variety of reasons, but one of the most common ones is it's basically what's been learned just by doing and moving along, and also the mentality of school. Since there's no testing or final exams or grades, people come up with this pass-fail. And if you think about it from a school standpoint, there is a learning curve, right? A person could go from 70 to 100 and get an A, even though they may have started at a 70, they can still have a 4.0. Whereas in business, because we don't have this clarity, we don't have these distinctions all the time, it's easy to go pass-fail. And when you go pass-fail, people start hiding the deficiencies. They don't want to learn because they don't want to look stupid. But when you have a development plan that is constantly adapted and also goes out over 2 years with touch points along the way, you're constantly talking about development, and no one's going to be perfect in everything. So there's always going to be developmental opportunities. There's always going to be some middle level players. Everybody's not going to be a mastery level in everything. They don't need to be a master at everything. But your trainer is going to have a certain level of expertise. A project leader is going to have a different level of expertise than somebody who's on the leadership team, but on the operations side. So that gives you an idea. But in practice, what you'll find is that having a shared language goes a long way. Using shared frameworks goes a long way. And these things become natural. They become part of the fabric. And the reason why I'm staying on this point about the growth mindset is that by continuing to use the same process, people are adapting and you're building on it. And if you go back to last week when I talked about developmental language, you're building habits with your processes, so you're not always training. You're not always dealing with new stuff. It's literally building and building and building. And because it's all coming out of the vision, it's aligned with where you're going long term. So I'll get off the soapbox and let's start taking a look at some examples. And I'll start with the matrix because it's simple and it's one that I found very, very useful. So there's one of the pet peeves I have with a lot of the business communication is that there's so much focus on growth, and it's at all costs. And it takes on a life of its own because what you have is sometimes salespeople who are selling to the industry, they're so focused on revenue and they forget that only about 5 to 10% of that revenue actually goes through to the profit. And if it doesn't serve their need, obviously, if they're selling you something, they're going to be talking about revenue. But you have to remember as the owner that you're paying for these things out of what amounts to profit, not out of revenue. It may come off the revenue, but it's impacting your profit. And until you're getting a return on it, so, what I would say is you have gating and you have sort of a way to test to see if things are going well and give it 3 months. I know one person likes to talk about every process is on trial for its life. That was way of looking at it. And then this, with the VUCA environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, it's only getting to be more and more and more. I mean, offers is showing up at hyper speed now because artificial intelligence can build apps and offers and create new landing pages, and this is happening at hyper speed. So there's always something new coming in, and you can feel it. You can feel the amount of competition that's out there, marketing to businesses. So we don't want to just focus on growth. We want to focus on profitable growth. And the way to do that is you don't think about growth one day and profit the next day. You look at things in the context of growth and profit. And you can, if it's down here, you might say, well, you know what, this is a non-starter. It's a good way to say this is not going to work for us. And, if you can get something that's up here, that's where we want to be. So, and then you have your other things that are more growth oriented, and you have other initiatives that are profit oriented. This gets your cross-functional teams working together because you have to be able to find ways to make profit. It gets you looking at ad copy instead of just throwing more ads out there. You're looking at the conversion rates inside the ads, which you're probably doing anyway, but there's different ways you can change how you're marketing, and whether you're using ascension ladders or cross-selling and upselling, there's different ways that you can extract more profit from the spend. Also, different ways of advertising. I remember the amount of, everybody had a solution for advertising, and still does. Everybody has a new way of lead generation. And I'm not saying they don't work, but what you want to do is look at things that are directional with your vision. You want to make sure that you're using things that are sustainable and you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time, because every time you reinvent the wheel, you're skipping some steps on that flywheel. Remember the good to great, the flywheel, turning that flywheel every day. You come in and turn it a bit. Well, if you're constantly changing, losing some of your momentum. Another one I like to use is probability and severity. So, and this can go two ways. You have situations where people are so caught up in the fact that there might be this problem that occurs, this risk, there's a risk out there. Well, yeah, we always have risks, but one way to look at risk is what's the probability that this risk will occur? And if the risk does occur, what's the likelihood that it's severe enough to be an impact? Some stuff is just normal cost of doing business, right? But if it's a high severity existential kind of event, and that's going to be out here, but the probability is very low, that takes a different kind of mitigation than if it's up here, high severity and high probability. Even something that's in here could be something that you're paying attention to because it could be an impact. And then you're able to look at it on a relative basis. Another one I like to use, succession planning. You have to decide who's going to be promoted next. Too often it makes sense, it's easy, and managers and leaders tend to look for the expedient thing, right? Everybody wants to, go home and get a good night's sleep, right, and move on. And also there's a sort of a pattern for managers to be efficient, and that efficiency leads to expediency. So I like to say effective first, then efficient. You can even make that a grid, right? You can even do effective and efficiency. You can even do this. You can even look at effectiveness and efficiency when you're working on a project or a plan. And I have a grid I'll go through with you in a moment that illustrates that. And then the one I was talking about was succession planning. So this could be project related. This is risk related. And then this one is succession planning. So in succession planning, we have results and we have methods. Just because the person got results doesn't mean that they should be the one taking over the department. And I know you've seen this where people got results because they cut corners, but maybe they're just using loopholes that are already there. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It's just that they're cutting corners. Well, that's not necessarily the person you want. I know in the book, Stephen Covey likes to talk about in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he liked to talk about the manager who got promoted because they ran the equipment without getting maintenance. And, obviously it sounds like more of a manufacturing example, right? But they ran the equipment without getting it maintained. and they got promoted because of their results. And then the next person who comes along, the machine's always down, and it makes the first person look even better than they are. And then the other person looks worse because they can't get the results, and then they're under pressure, and then it's just, you're constant. When you're on your heels, it's always harder to get going. So we want to look at results, and we want to look at methods. And you're not trying to hire somebody or promote somebody who's here, and you're not trying to promote somebody who's here. And so what you get with these is you get this arc. All of these, you end up with an arc, because you're not going to have perfection, but you're trying to get things that are out here. You don't want to, obviously you wouldn't promote the person who's here unless there's a very specific reason, a very specific project. But what you're wanting to do is move out here and getting a balance. You want some people who are more on the result side and some people who are more on the perfect method side. But what it does, it eliminates the likelihood of getting somebody in there who got results because they cut corners or because they knew somebody. So those are examples. And these four you could literally take to your leadership team in one staff meeting and introduce. And don't take my four, change based on your organization. But now when somebody brings you a proposal, when they bring you an idea, they want to talk to you about something, you can have a common expectation that they use one of those four frameworks. And another one I like to use, this one is when you're thinking about a new option, a project, an initiative. Option 1, 3, 4. And of course you don't always need 4, but the idea is that if you want to get more than one solution. So the 5-step problem solving model is clearly identify the problem. That's an important step, especially in operations environments. They often miss that. They solve the problem real quick and create new problems in the process. But that's okay, because that's what they do. They're constantly fixing problems. They don't want to spend time draining the swamp. They're busy fighting alligators. They're just going to keep fighting alligators. Whereas what we want to do is get in the habit of spending time draining the swamp, so one day there's no more alligators. But what we're going to do is, this is before we're in this very early on in the idea stage, maybe even in the brainstorming stage. As I said, the problem solving models clearly identify the problem, brainstorm for possible solutions, select the best solution, and then implement and follow up. Or you have to obviously design and build it and then implement it and follow up. And there's also short-term fix you can put in there. You can come up with, like I said, adapt or reflect and adapt or adjust. But what we're going to do is score 1 to 5, 5 being good, except for risk. Risk is 5 to 1. So this is leverage. This is ease of implementation, ease of build. This is risk, and this is return. So this is another thing that you can introduce it in one setting, in a meeting, go through an exercise, and we'll talk about this next week when I get into deep practice, but I really want to emphasize it's not a verbal conversation. We have way, way, way too much where people know and don't do. To know and not do is to not know. Doing, remember, most cognitive processing is physiological. People operate their lives 95% by habit. If we rely on communication, words, the likelihood of having an impact, you're working on the 5%, because the 95% by habit is going to take over right away. The 95% by habit is the neural pathways. They're formed, they got myelin wrapped around them, the synaptogenesis is supporting it, you got the dopamine, the neurotransmitter. And so that habit is what's going to win. Given the choice between belief or habit and willpower, belief and habit win. So you don't want to just introduce it. You want to have a conversation about it, do a mini case study, use 2 or 3 things that you're thinking about, have each person in the room come up with one initiative that they think is good, and then you could do this scoring. So people get to use it, but then the next time you have an idea that you're thinking about, use this model. And just always go back to this model. Now we've got 2 frameworks. Both of them can be taught in one session. They're both skills that people can develop. And once you get into the habit of people learning skills, it gets easier because we need bigger skills. We need to be able to present to internal audiences, external audience. We need people to build, to go A to Z, doing a product test or a service test where they can direct the landing page, they can direct the ad copy, etc. And you want to have them go. Those are bigger skills. Having a brainstorming meeting might be a small skill, but being able to lead a project from start to hiring the project manager to the gating, that's a big skill that needs to be done. So you'll figure that out, but it gets easier, and you can actually use this matrix to help you define that. So we're going to score this. So leverage might be a 3 for this option 1. Ease might be a 5 because it's difficult. The risk is low, so that's going to be a 4. But the return is kind of iffy. So so you got 14, and then you would score it against another one. And it's not just an objective view. It does help to have the objective view, but then you also can have subjective conversation, because although this return might be low, it may be supporting or may be connected to something else that's really important. Now what we'll do next is we'll go through some slides. And by the way, so there's going to be on Monday, 7 o'clock Pacific time, I have an open forum, sort of an Ask Me Anything about dynamic leadership. It's happening this Monday coming up, as well as the next 2 Mondays, 7 a.m. Pacific time. It'll go for about an hour and a half. It does require registration because I need to keep the group small enough so we can have some conversation. And you can find the link in the description where you can register there. And I'm also going to put some resources out on dynamicleadershipcenter.com/resources. So some of the things I share with you today will find their way onto the resource page. So we've got the development plans, not just for gaps. So development plans, typically we start with an assessment and you identify what the gap is, and this is to be more prescriptive. And it makes sense when you're talking about being in an operational environment where there's lots of controls around, because everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. They're doing the work. You're only going to do interventions when there's a problem. But what we're talking about is building an organization for scaling with a growth mindset towards your vision. And so it's not just about gaps. Development planning is more than just a fix, not about addressing deficits or correcting behavior. While it is for that, what we're talking about today is using it to onboard, to align, and scale leadership in line with your unique culture. And I'm big on the onboarding. So there are organizations that the onboarding tends to be the things that are required. I talked about this last week. And there's very little work that has to do with high performance. If you think about a sports team, it's the opposite. Very little time is spent on the housekeeping, and they focus on the plays. They're drilling, constantly drilling and doing the plays. And this is somewhere in the middle is the right place to be. Obviously, you can't run an organization without following regulations, but at the same time, if we're not spending time on the development piece, we're leaving money on the table. And it's going to make it harder in the future to scale. So we want to build that capability before performance gaps appear. Build a bench before you need a new captain. The next one is there's 2 development planning paths that you can think about. And you want to choose the right type of plan. The foundational plan, this is what we're talking about. This is where we're starting. These are things you cover in the onboarding meeting. And it's actually a process. It's a meeting, but it's also a process. Because in the onboarding process, that's where you're helping people understand they're going to have development plans. There will be, it is a learning and development organization. And it's relevant learning. It's not just wasting time, but there is going to be learning. This sets it up so that it doesn't feel so awkward, because initially people may resist this. They don't want to sit in a training class. They've been doing this thing, especially your senior leaders. They've been leading for so long. A lot of people don't want to learn new things. And I would be covering this in the interview process, making sure you're hiring the right people. Why would you hire somebody who doesn't have a growth mindset? It's not like you're going to give them a growth mindset. You could influence them, but isn't it easier to start with people who already have the growth mindset? If someone has a growth mindset, there's not a lot of selling that has to be done. So I'm not saying don't focus on gap closing work, but there's so much of that available. You can go online and just start looking for templates and doing development plans. and you'll find a lot of the gap closing type work. We're talking today about the foundational work. And then we have why this matters when scaling. Scaling without culture. You've heard that culture eats strategy for lunch. If you set the culture right, scaling becomes easier. Leaders need more than technical skills. They need to lead the way that you lead and the way that you want to lead, and that should be aligned with the vision. And if you don't have the skills and the knowledge and the experience, then get your training. There's plenty of opportunities to get leadership development work, and make sure that it's an application type model where you're getting to apply it, where you're learning. Remember, I said to know and not do is to not know. So you ideally, like my program is a 90-day transformation program, because each week you're learning and applying new skills, and we're finding out where you're struggling. We create some struggle on the edge of ability, so it all becomes ingrained in the neural pathways, and those become real skills. It's not just something you heard about one time and may never use again. The nice thing about the neural pathway approach is that neurons that fire together wire together. So you start getting connections and hooks into those neural pathways, and it comes up and becomes second nature. Development plans help replicate the mindset, style, and behaviors that matter. So again, you start with your vision. We talked about this the last 2 weeks. So that cone of focus. So what's in that cone of focus? We're going to exclude this stuff out here. We're going this way. And then what are the skills that I need? What are the skills my leadership team needs? What are the skills that the managers need? And I use employees generically, but we're talking about your extended teams as well. We're talking about your freelancers that work for you, your associates. Without this, the scale introduces chaos instead of capacity. And I use the example of metaphors a lot. I like the team metaphor because it works. It's sustainable. When you start having a family metaphor, it gets clunky when you start talking about promotions or dealing with poor performance. Team, how do you deal with poor performance? You put them on the proverbial bench. How do you deal with persistent poor performance? You deselect them. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of explanation when you're in a team metaphor. When you're living in a family metaphor, you got favorites, and one day you do it this way, another way you do it another way. Delegation and development. I know some leaders have difficulty delegating. That's a challenge, especially as you go from the 6 to 10 people and you're moving up to the 20 and 30 people. It's letting go. I mean, each time you add another leader in there, you're letting go of some things, and it gets scary. But you're getting more dollars per employee. It allows you to build in some controls and some support. But you want to think about development in the context of delegation. You don't want to just delegate something. So, for example, most owners have to do something with the administration office, the business licensing office, or whatever it's called in your area. And that is fairly straightforward once you learn it. You have to get some relationships. But the next time you have a zoning, I'll call it zoning, next time you have a zoning issue that comes up or something you have to deal with the zoning office, instead of doing it yourself, you organize the work and let somebody do it with you or for you. You can start by just having them call the zoning office and get more information, what it's about, what are the ifs, ands, and buts, what is the timeline, just get information. The next thing they could do, step 1 and step 2. Then they could do step 1, 2, and 3. Next thing you could do, you can actually delegate that process to them. And once they learn that department, the next time something comes up, they become a natural. So I'm also big on the leadership team having additional duties. So one person might have responsibility for project leadership. Another one might have responsibility for, like I was just saying, the municipalities. Another one may have responsibility for working with your marketing agency or your advertising agency. So anyway, development plans align with delegation stages, task, function, department. So you start thinking about delegating tasks, that evolves to function, then department. Leaders grow into scope, not just responsibility. Delegating without development leads to drop balls and friction. And we see this. And because of the pass-fail mentality, we assume that somebody's bad because they didn't get it right. Well, that's crazy, right? We want to have a development time and have a higher bar. We want the bar high enough so people aren't learning it first time out the chute. Think about that. What's the value of having a low bar so everybody wins when you can have a higher bar and spend an extra day or two to clear it? Because that pays dividends forever. What to include in the plan, development plan elements, the skill area, expectations, the strategic, why you have to connect it back to the vision and the mission, milestones, gating, what are the milestones that you're going to have, and then evaluation plan, who's observing and how it's done. And we'll take a look at those. But as you do more of this, it gets easier and easier. I hopefully one of the things that the takeaway is there's been a trend. It's not recent. It's been ongoing for a while where people have outsourced a lot of the HR function, and the providers have stepped up and taken that on. So you can outsource recruiting. You can outsource your required training, sexual harassment, those kinds of things, violence in the workplace. But one of the things that they probably don't delegate often enough or adopt often enough is the leadership development, because it's different disciplines. And that used to live in the HR department. So if you've outsourced HR, understand that you may want to build a development piece in your organization, a development department or a development division in your organization, and take that on. Like I said, this lived in HR before, and there was constant development. You had management programs, so all the leaders knew the common language. Now, it's like it could be all over the place. So just think about that as you build your organization, how you want to handle the development side of the HR. I think the control side, the compliance side, there's plenty of options there. And on the development side, you can think of working with one development organization for a while until you outgrow them and then move on to the next one. But essentially, you're sort of like having an organization serve you, but you get to know them and they get to know you. Organization skill development overview. So you have the skill area. What is the leadership, management, or cultural skill that's being developed? And, I give an example here, facilitative leadership facilitation versus presenting. Those are skills. Everyone knows that they should be, leaders know that they should be able to speak in public. Some are better than others, some aren't, and that doesn't matter. But I think leaders should understand the difference between presentation and facilitation, and when to use one or the other, and how to move fluidly, and what are the rules. There are different rules when you're facilitating and different rules when you're presenting. For example, the key to the 99 is the one. If you're facilitating and you're asking questions and you shoot down somebody's answer, you could lose the whole group. You can lose the whole group for 15, 20 minutes or the rest of the session just by not honoring that person's answer. Even though it was wrong, it's how you do it. You have to have some elegance. Whereas presenting, you're not getting that kind of feedback. Just an example. And I have NVC, that's nonviolent communication. That's a model. That's one of those skills you can learn. You can go look that up, lay it out, and share that with your people and tell them that you want to use that model. And I would say as the owner, you can observe people role playing, and I do think you should role play the nonviolent communication. You have to role play this stuff because knowing it is a mental exercise. Role playing is a physiological cognitive exercise, and that's where habit lives. Then skill description and expectations. What does success look like when the skill is performed well within the organization, and then why it matters. If you've been in the service, or you think about how how law enforcement has to be developed and trained, you can see that there's pieces that they all have to know, and there's protocols that they have to follow. Why wouldn't it be any different in your organization with as much as riding on the line? There's a reason why businesses have a high failure rate, and we don't have to accept all of those root causes. We can chip away at some of those root causes and stack the deck in our favor. Milestones and demonstrations example. So this is just a quick example. You can take a screenshot of that. The milestone, you want to have a feedback session using nonviolent communication. They've got to prepare and plan, and you want to see this happen in 30 days. Here's an example. You could put this into place right now. It's not going to hurt you, right? Facilitate a team point of view. So they've got to facilitate a conversation, maybe cross-functional or maybe just on their team, depending on the leadership role and your structure. But they gather input, use structure. That's done within 90 days. So if this is a new person to your organization, within 90 days, they will have gotten to know a few people, and they know their way around, I should say. and they should be in a position where they can facilitate that. It may not be perfect the first time out. You're not trying to get perfection the first time out. What you're doing is building these on ramps, these development on ramps. So there's always development on ramps going on, and your organization is getting stronger as a result. And then the last one I have, a proposed team improvement plan, aligns with organization goals, uses data, communicate it clearly. That whole process, that end-to-end 180 days for a leader, they should be able to do that. Most have probably done it in their prior organization. Once you observe it, you will decide, is this checked off and done, or will there be some additional training on it? This is not a pass-fail, and it doesn't mean if they didn't get it right, they're not good, because there's going to be some that they ace right out the chute, and there's going to be some that they need some development on. So you want to have that growth mindset that all we want to do is assess and then work on improving. Assess, work on improving. And it's a rhythm that you'll get into. Proficiency level, skill maturity and scaling. From unaware, and then aware, and then capable, skilled, and then trainer or coach. What I've been doing there is just giving you sort of a level so you can see that everybody doesn't have to be at the mastery level. You might have people just at the capable level. Others might be at the skilled level. Probably, I think everybody needs to have at least awareness. If it's an important skill, it should at least be awareness. But if you have a big organization, there may be some people that don't even need to know about it. So it's just another way of thinking about it. These are options. I'm just giving you some examples. Then we have proficiency assessment options. It could be a self-assessment where they assess themselves, and then you could follow it up, right, with direct observation. That's pretty good because you can see how much self-awareness they have. Results-based evaluation, and there's nothing wrong with the results-based evaluation, but typically when you have gap closure, they're measuring results. I think measuring results is fine, but in the foundational development, we've got to also measure the how and the methodology and the steps. Are they doing the internal right? Are they doing that part well? Development actions by proficiency level, level 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and then 4 to 5. So this is a pretty common one again. But I'm just reiterating this need to have some kind of a scoring system that's not just pass-fail, and everybody doesn't have to be at the top. This is not going to tie into their succession planning. Succession planning is about results and the methodology that they're doing, and also the fit. The most qualified person may not be promoted into the position because they're not a fit for that next role. So that's another thing that comes into play. I'll close with that one. Example foundational plan. Milestones, lead a cross-functional meeting. This is kind of like the other example I was giving, but this is cross-functional. To lead a cross-functional meeting using a shared agenda. So you've got to engage others, balance voices, drive action. You're going to see how this person interacts, and you're doing it at a time when the stakes are low. Now, when there's a crisis, and I say there's always going to be another crisis, we just don't know where or when or how big, but when that next crisis comes, you're going to need your team to get out in front of it and start handling some of the things. You can't be the bottleneck as the owner. And this is a way to start learning and having people work on those skills so they're not doing it under the fire of a crisis. And then the next one, coaching a direct report through a stuck point. You could also have them coaching a peer just to see their coaching skills. And then there's the proficiency levels again, maturity and equals role readiness, unaware to all the way to mastery. The last bullet there helps you build capability before performance gaps appear. That's the thinking you want to have. Whereas sports teams are practicing for their next big game or the weekly game or maybe the night game in another few days. In business, what we're practicing for is the crisis and the opportunities. Within a crisis, there's usually opportunities. That's what we're practicing for. We're getting ready for that next big thing so we could take advantage of it. And then we have next steps for owners, what you can do now. Identify 1 to 2 leadership skills you want scaled across the organization. Use a foundational development plan with any new leader or promoted manager. Good enough is good enough to start. You don't have to have the entire plan laid out. I gave you examples of a XY axis, those matrix that you can use to help facilitate your conversation, start building a common language. The LERR is another one. And then add milestones to onboarding. So this is big. I would take a look at your onboarding process and start adding in some performance related items, so it's not just regulatory and housekeeping. It's very important. And in there, it's also the positioning and communication about development plans. So it's not a surprise when people are sitting having to go to a meeting to learn X, Y, or Z, or they're being evaluated or something. Another thing you can do is add in 360s. That's something I would add. And when possible, use shared templates across roles to increase the uptake. We talked about promotions. This may not be intuitive, but if you think about a promotion, whether when somebody's ready to get promoted to leadership, you have results, you have relationships, and this is also interpersonal skills. And we have fit. And fit is not just, is that their discipline. Just because a person came up in marketing doesn't mean that they can't take a role in technology, for example, if they have those skills, or vice versa. So this has to do with, obviously, its strengths, its experience, its timing, its big picture, the overall. Now, when I first saw this, I was like, what? So think about this. A person would not be on the list to talk about, this is succession planning. We already talked about the matrix of results and methods. But a person wouldn't be in the conversation if they weren't getting results. So let's say that the fit, the strengths, experience, timing overall, and this is for leadership succession planning. This is not just a random promotion. This is specifically for the leadership team. So the fit, I'm going to call this about 20% of the conversation. And this is only bringing objectivity to it. Obviously, in your business, it will be different. You have to decide that for yourself. But generally speaking, we're going to call the interpersonal skills and the relationship piece 70%. Think about it. What we're talking about, dynamic leadership. We're talking about self-determination theory, intrinsic motivation, multipliers versus diminishers. If you can't get the basics done in the interpersonal area, they're probably not going to be the one who gets promoted. This takes you away from promoting the wrong people just because of results. Results are only 10%. The way to get your head wrapped around this is that a person would not be in the conversation if they didn't have results. So everybody's getting results who's in the conversation. To split hairs because this one is above that person on another given day or another given year or another given project, it could be flipped, right? You're talking about the top three. The top three are the top three. Look at automobile racing, right? You have winners and losers in each race, and it's the consistency of those top three that are the champion is going to come out of them. And so it's the same way. They wouldn't be in the conversation if the results weren't there. So you reduce the weight of that one. And then when you apply the results and the methods, that allows you to look at the relationship and also the fit. So that's just again, this is another one you can apply to the next time you have succession planning. I gave you now, 2 or 3 things, 4 things that you can introduce to your team without doing any other work. And these are best practices. You go to any major consulting firms, et cetera, they're going to have something similar to this because it works. It's fundamentals. Next week, we'll talk about making the development plan process part of your normal conversation in your business, to making it live so it's not an add-on, it's actually in the fabric. All right, we'll see you. And remember, 7 o'clock Pacific time on Monday, we're doing an open forum. You can go to the link that's in the description to get there.